Imagine this, the most powerful empire in the world, a place where blood flowed through the streets and betrayal was just another part of life. This is ancient Rome, and surviving here was far harder than you could ever imagine. Today, we bring back to life a story buried deep within the dusty pages of history. If you're ready, we're going to Rome. Rome, 44 BC. The air was thick with tension, not the kind you could see, but the kind you could feel. Whispers echoed through marble halls. Senators spoke in hushed voices. Eyes avoided each other. Smiles hid something darker. Because at the center of it all was one man. A man who had risen higher than any Roman before him. A man who had defeated armies, conquered lands, and reshaped the Republic itself. Julius Caesar. He was no longer just a general. He was no longer just a politician. He was something far more dangerous. To some, he was Rome's greatest savior. To others, he was becoming its greatest threat, the rise of power. Caesar's journey to power wasn't luck, it was war. Years earlier, he had marched into Gaul, a land of fierce tribes and endless battles. What followed was brutal. Campaign after campaign, victory after victory. By the time he returned to Rome, he wasn't just a man. He was a legend. His soldiers were loyal to him, not the Senate. His name inspired fear and admiration, and most importantly, he had power. But Rome had rules, or at least it used to. No man was supposed to become too powerful. No man was supposed to stand above the Republic. And yet, Caesar was doing exactly that. There was a moment, a single decision that changed everything. The Senate had ordered Caesar to give up his army, to return to Rome as a private citizen. But Caesar knew what that meant. Without his army, he would be vulnerable. His enemies would destroy him. So instead, he made a choice that would echo through history. He crossed the Rubicon River with his army. This was not just rebellion, this was war, civil war, Rome against itself. And Caesar won, the dictator. After defeating his enemies, Caesar returned to Rome as its undisputed ruler. Titles were given to him, honors stacked endlessly, statues were built in his image, and then something unthinkable happened. He was declared dictator for life. That phrase changed everything, because Rome hated kings. They had overthrown their last king centuries ago. The Republic was built on one idea: no single man should hold absolute power. But now, Caesar did. The silent fear. At first, many celebrated him. He brought stability. He reformed the system. He forgave his enemies, something unheard of. But beneath the surface, fear was growing. Senators began to ask themselves, what happens when one man controls everything? What happens when the Republic becomes an empire? And the most dangerous question of all, is Caesar becoming a king? The seeds of betrayal. Among those watching closely were men who had once stood beside him, men who owed him their lives, men who called him friend. One of them was Marcus Junius Brutus, a respected senator, a man known for honor, a man Caesar trusted deeply. Some even said Caesar saw him as a son. But Brutus was torn, because he loved Rome more than he loved Caesar. And he wasn't alone. The conspiracy begins in the shadows of Rome. A group began to form, quietly, carefully. They called themselves the Liberators. Their goal? Simple, terrifying, final. They believed Caesar had to die, not out of hatred, but out of fear. Fear that if they did nothing, Rome would never be free again. Meetings were held in secret. Plans were whispered. Oaths were taken. Each man knew the risk. If they failed, they would be executed. If they succeeded, they might still be remembered as traitors. But in their minds, they were saving the Republic. a warning ignored. As the plot grew, so did the signs. Strange warnings began to appear. A soothsayer once approached Caesar and said, "Beware the Ides of March." March 15th. Caesar laughed it off. He didn't believe in omens. He didn't believe anyone would dare touch him. After all, he was Caesar. But not everyone felt the same. His wife, Calpurnia, had nightmares, terrifying visions of his death. She begged him not to go to the Senate that day, begged him to stay home for a moment. He hesitated, but then his pride took over the final decision. The Senate had summoned him. Important matters, they said, decisions that required his presence, and Caesar would not appear weak. He would not hide. He would not show fear. So, on the morning of March 15th, he prepared to leave. Outside, Rome moved as always. Crowds gathered, merchants shouted, life continued, but hidden within that normal day was something else. A plan, a betrayal, a moment that would change history forever. The calm before the storm. As Caesar made his way to the Senate, the conspirators were already there, waiting, watching, their hands steady, but their hearts racing, because once it began, there was no turning back. Brutus stood among them, silent, conflicted. This was the moment, the line between loyalty and duty, friendship and betrayal. And soon, he would have to choose. The Rome turned on its leader. The morning of March 15th had arrived, the Ides of March. Rome looked peaceful, but beneath that calm surface, something was about to break. Caesar stepped out into the streets, dressed in his robes, confident, unshaken. As he walked, a familiar voice called out, the same soothsayer who had warned him before. "Beware the Ides of March," Caesar smirked. "The Ides of March have come," he said. The soothsayer replied quietly, "Aye, but they are not yet gone." For a brief moment, time seemed to pause, but Caesar kept walking. The Senate awaits inside the Senate chamber. The conspirators were already in place, more than 60 men, each one hiding a blade beneath their robes, each one pretending nothing was wrong. They greeted Caesar as he entered, respectfully, calmly, just as they always had. Among them stood Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, the leaders of the conspiracy. Their eyes met briefly. No words were needed. It was time. The distraction. The plan was simple. Get close, surround him, strike together. A senator named Julius Caesar approached Caesar first. He knelt before him as if to present a petition. Caesar tried to dismiss him, but Caesar persisted, grabbing Caesar's toga, pulling it down slightly. That was the signal. The first blow. Everything happened in seconds. Casca struck first, a quick, clumsy attack from behind. His blade grazed Caesar's neck. Caesar reacted instantly. He turned, grabbed Casca's arm and shouted, "Villain! What are you doing?" For a moment. It almost failed, but then the others moved. The circle close's blades flashed from every direction. They surrounded him. Friends, allies, men he trusted, and they began to stab, one after another. No hesitation, no mercy. Caesar fought back. At first, he tried to resist, tried to escape, but there were too many. Each strike weakened him. Each betrayal cut deeper than the last. The final betrayal. And then he saw him, Brutus, standing among the attackers, holding a blade. For a moment, everything else faded. The noise, the chaos, the pain, all that remained was disbelief. This was not just another enemy. This was someone he trusted, someone he cared for. And in that moment, Caesar understood. He was alone. Et tu, Brute? As Brutus stepped forward and Caesar stopped resisting. His body weakened, but it wasn't the wounds. It was the betrayal. According to legend, he spoke his final words. Et tu, Brute? Even you, Brutus? And just like that, the fight left him. The full Caesar collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue, a cruel irony. Pompey had once been his rival. Now, Caesar died beneath his shadow. The blades kept striking, even after he fell. By the end, he had been stabbed 23 times, 23 wounds, from men who claimed to save Rome. Silence. And then it was over. The room fell silent. The greatest man in Rome lay dead on the floor, blood spread across the marble. The conspirators stood frozen, breathing heavily, hands shaking. They had done it. They had killed Caesar. Rome is free. Cassius stepped forward, voice trembling but loud. Liberty, freedom, tyranny is dead. They believed the people would celebrate, that Rome would rise with them, that they would be seen as heroes. But outside, something very different was beginning, the unexpected reaction. When the news spread, Rome did not celebrate. There were no cheers, no joy, only confusion, shock, fear, because Caesar was not just a ruler. To many, he was a protector, a leader, a symbol of stability. And now he was gone. A dangerous miscalculation. The conspirators had expected gratitude, but what they created instead was chaos. They underestimated something crucial, the people's love for Caesar, and even more dangerous, they underestimated one man, a man who had not been in the Senate that day, a man who would soon change everything, Mark Antony. The storm is coming, as Caesar's body lay lifeless. The city of Rome stood on the edge, not of freedom, but of something far worse, revenge, war, and the fall of everything they tried to protect, the revenge that changed Rome forever. Rome was no longer calm. It was holding its breath. Inside the Senate, Caesar was dead, but outside, the city had just begun to wake up to the truth. Whispers turned into rumors. Rumors turned into panic. Caesar is dead. Caesar has been murdered by the Senate. And just like that, fear spread through the streets like fire. The aftermath. The conspirators walked out of the Senate together, their hands still stained with blood. They raised their blades in the air, shouting, "Freedom! Liberty! The Republic is saved!" But no one cheered. The streets were silent. People stepped back, eyes wide, uncertain. This was not the reaction they expected, because deep down, the people knew something the conspirators did not. Killing Caesar did not bring peace. It created a vacuum, a city without control. Rome had lost its center, its leader, its balance, and in that chaos, power does not disappear. It shifts. The man they didn't kill. There was one man who had not been in the Senate that day, a man who had been close to Caesar, loyal to him, trusted by him, Mark Antony. When he heard the news, he didn't react immediately. He didn't shout. He didn't rush into the streets. He thought. Because Antony understood something very clearly. If the conspirators could kill Caesar, they could kill him too. So instead of confronting them, he played along. A dangerous game. Antony met with the conspirators, calm, careful. He shook their hands, spoke respectfully, even agreed with them on the surface. It shocked them. They expected anger, revenge, but instead they saw cooperation. And that was exactly what Antony wanted them to see, because behind that calm exterior, a plan was forming. The funeral Caesar's body was prepared for public viewing. A funeral was announced. The conspirators allowed it. They thought it would help their cause. They thought the people would understand. But they made one critical mistake. They allowed Antony to speak. The speech that ignited Rome. The forum was packed. Citizens gathered in massive numbers, some confused, some angry, some grieving. Caesar's body lay before them, covered but present. Antony stepped forward. At first, he spoke carefully. He did not attack the conspirators directly. He did not call them murderers. Instead, he told a story. He reminded the people who Caesar was, a leader who brought victory, a man who filled Rome's treasury, a ruler who showed mercy. Again and again, he repeated one line, Brutus is an honourable man. But each time, the meaning changed. At first it sounded respectful, then it sounded doubtful, and finally, it sounded like an accusation. The turning point. Then Antony revealed something. That changed everything. Caesar's will. He read it aloud. Caesar had left money to the citizens of Rome. He had given them gardens, public land. Even in death, he was thinking of them. The crowd began to shift. Murmurs turned into anger. Why would they kill a man like this? Why did the Senate betray him? And then Antony made his final move, the body revealed. He uncovered Caesar's body. Gasps filled the air, the wounds were visible. Each stab, each betrayal. Antony pointed them out one by one. This was the cut from Cassius. This from Casca. And then he paused. And this, the most cruel cut of all. The one from Brutus. The explosion. The crowd erupted. Anger, rage, grief. Everything exploded at once. This was no longer a funeral. It was the beginning of a riot. People screamed for justice. They grabbed whatever they could find. Torches, weapons, stones. The conspirators had lost control. Rome burns. The mob surged through the streets. They hunted for the men responsible. Homes were attacked. Buildings burned. The Senate, the symbol of power, was no longer safe. The men who claimed to save Rome were now running for their lives. The beginning of War. Brutus, Cassius, and the others fled the city. They had killed Caesar to save the Republic, but instead they had destroyed it, because now Rome was heading towards something far worse. Civil war, a new power rising. And in the middle of that chaos, a new name began to rise, a young man, not yet powerful, not yet feared, but connected to Caesar, in a way no one expected. Octavian. He was coming, and when he arrived, nothing would ever be the same. The death that ended the Roman Republic. Rome was no longer the same. The death of Caesar had not saved the Republic. It had broken it. The streets that once echoed with power and pride were now filled with uncertainty, fear, and something far more dangerous, ambition, the rise of a new power. In the chaos left behind, two forces began to emerge. On one side, the conspirators, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. They believed they had done the right thing, that history would remember them as heroes. On the other side, those loyal to Caesar. And at the center of that side stood two men, Mark Antony and a young, unexpected figure, Octavian, the heir of Caesar. Octavian was only 18 years old. He had no army, no great victories, no reputation, but he had something far more powerful. He was Caesar's adopted son and heir. When he arrived in Rome, few took him seriously, but that would change quickly, because Octavian was not just a boy, he was calculating, patient, ruthless, and he understood something that others did not. Power in Rome was no longer about tradition, it was about control. The second triumvirate. At first, Antony and Octavian did not trust each other. Both wanted power. Both had their own ambitions, but they shared one goal, revenge. So they formed an alliance. Together with a third man, Lepidus, they created what became known as the Second Triumvirate. It was not just a political alliance. It was a machine of power, and its purpose was clear: destroy Caesar's killers, the proscriptions. Before they marched to war, they cleaned Rome from within. Lists were created, names were written, enemies of the triumvirate, anyone who opposed them, anyone who stood in their way, was marked for death. This period became known as the proscriptions. Men were hunted, executed, their properties seized. Even allies were not safe. Fear returned to Rome, stronger than ever, because now killing was no longer hidden in shadows. It was law, the road to war. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius had gathered their forces in the east. They raised armies, prepared for the inevitable. They knew what was coming. This was no longer about ideals. This was war. The fate of Rome would be decided on the battlefield. The Battle of Philippi, 42 BC. In the plains of Philippi, two armies faced each other. On one side, Brutus and Cassius, defenders of the Republic. On the other, Antony and Octavian, avengers of Caesar. The tension was unbearable because this battle would decide everything. The first clash, the fighting was brutal. Cassius faced Antony, Brutus faced Octavian. Steel clashed, men screamed, blood covered the ground. Antony proved himself the stronger commander. He broke through Cassius's lines, and in the chaos, Cassius made a fatal mistake. Believing the battle was lost, he chose to end his own life. A tragic end, a man who thought he had saved Rome. Dying in defeat, the fall of Brutus. Brutus continued the fight. For a moment, it seemed like he might still win, but the odds were against him. His forces weakened, his allies gone, and eventually he too faced the inevitable. Rather than be captured, rather than be humiliated, Brutus made his final choice. He took his own life. The man who had betrayed Caesar now joined him in death. The end of the Republic, with Brutus and Cassius gone. The last defenders of the Republic had fallen. There was no one left to challenge the new power. The system that had ruled Rome for centuries was finished. Not officially, not immediately, but in reality, it was over. The birth of an empire. After the war, power remained in the hands of the victors, but even that alliance would not last. Antony and Octavian would soon turn against each other. Another war, another struggle for power, and in the end, only one would remain. Octavian. He would rise above everyone and take a new name, Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, the legacy of Caesar. And what of Caesar, the man whose death started it all? He did not live to see the empire, but it was his actions, his rise, his assassination. That made it inevitable, because by killing him, they did not save the Republic. They ensured its end. Final reflection. The conspirators believed they were heroes, that they were protecting freedom. But history tells a different story. Their blades did not restore Rome. They reshaped it forever.